What if some of the most important books ever written didn't disappear by accident, but were deliberately lost to history? Across the ancient world, entire libraries vanished in flames, scrolls were buried, destroyed, or simply forgotten. Inside them may have been knowledge about lost civilizations, forgotten technologies and stories that no one alive has ever read. Tonight we explore the lost books of the ancient world, the missing texts that continue to haunt historians, archaeologists and scholars to this day. Before we uncover these incredible mysteries, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we journey into history's greatest lost treasures. The room is silent except for the faint crackle of dry papyrus. A scholar bends over a scroll beneath the light of an oil lamp. Outside, a city lives, trades, argues, worships, and dreams. Inside, words are being copied carefully by hand line after line, preserving a voice that may already belong to a dead author. The scholar cannot know it, but the book resting beneath his fingers is living through one of the most dangerous moments in its existence. A single accident, a careless flame, a flood, a war, a generation that no longer cares to copy it. Any one of these could erase it forever. The strange thing is that most ancient books do not survive. When people imagine the ancient world, they often picture monuments that still stand after thousands of years. Stone temples remain on hillsides, ruined cities emerge from deserts, tombs survive beneath layers of earth. Massive walls continue to cast shadows long after the civilizations that built them have vanished. Yet books are different. The ideas, stories, histories, discoveries, and arguments that once filled entire libraries rarely leave visible ruins behind. They disappear quietly. The result is one of the greatest mysteries in human history. Every year, archaeologists uncover fragments of forgotten settlements, ancient roads, lost ports, and buried kingdoms. But the greatest lost city may not be a city at all. It may be the invisible landscape of missing knowledge. Entire worlds of thought have vanished so completely that modern humanity often knows only their outlines. The surviving books of the ancient world create an illusion of completeness. Names such as Homer, Herodotus, Aristotle, Virgil, and others remain familiar. Their works are printed in modern editions, translated into dozens of languages, and studied across the globe. It is easy to imagine that these surviving texts represent a substantial portion of ancient literature. The reality is far more unsettling. What survives is only a tiny fraction. Historians estimate that most ancient literature has been lost. The exact percentage remains impossible to calculate because nobody can count books that no longer exist. Yet the surviving evidence suggests a catastrophe unfolding not in a single moment, but across centuries. Generation after generation, books disappeared faster than they could be preserved. Imagine walking into a vast library containing 100,000 books. Then imagine 95,000 or more of them being removed forever, leaving only a few shelves behind. The remaining books might still tell important stories. They might still preserve remarkable ideas. But they would provide only a narrow window into the intellectual world that once existed. That is the situation confronting historians today. The ancient world was not silent. It produced an enormous volume of writing. Poets composed epics and tragedies. Philosophers debated the nature of reality. Scientists observed stars, animals, and the human body. Historians recorded wars and political struggles. Travelers described distant lands. Engineers explained machines. Religious thinkers explored questions of meaning and belief. Ordinary people wrote letters, contracts, and personal reflections. Most of these voices are gone. In many cases, scholars know a book once existed because another author mentioned it. A title survives. Occasionally a sentence survives. Sometimes only the author's name remains. It is like standing in a graveyard where the tombstones have disappeared, but faint impressions remain in the grass. The losses are so extensive that entire fields of ancient thought may be missing from the historical record. A philosopher may have developed an argument that influenced generations before vanishing completely. A historian may have described events from an eyewitness perspective that no longer survives. A scientist may have recorded observations that were never copied again. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives in the record suggests a world of ideas far larger than the fragments available today. This realization changes the way ancient history appears. The past often feels distant because it reaches modern people through a narrow collection of surviving sources. Yet the ancient world itself was crowded with competing opinions, rival interpretations, forgotten discoveries, and literary traditions now almost entirely invisible. The books that survived did not necessarily survive because they were the best. Many survived because of luck. Luck matters far more in the history of books than many people realize. A manuscript copied at the right moment might endure. Another manuscript left uncopied for a century could vanish forever. A city spared from destruction might preserve texts unavailable elsewhere. A monastery centuries later might decide certain works deserved copying while ignoring others. Small decisions accumulated over generations determining which voices would reach the future. Sometimes survival depended on astonishing coincidences. A scroll forgotten in an Egyptian desert might avoid moisture long enough to endure for 2,000 years. A text buried by a volcanic eruption might survive because disaster sealed it away from decay. A manuscript carried across a sea by a refugee might become the only surviving copy of a work once read throughout an empire. Meanwhile, thousands of other books simply disappeared. The loss was often invisible. There was no ceremony marking the death of a text. No announcement informed future generations that a particular work had vanished forever. One damaged copy became two damaged copies, then one, then none. Knowledge can die quietly. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The mystery becomes even stranger when considering how much effort ancient societies invested in preserving knowledge. Copyists spent years mastering their craft. Libraries employed scholars to organize collections. Rulers funded archives. Religious institutions maintained records. Teachers transmitted texts from one generation to the next. Despite all of this effort, disappearance remained the normal outcome. Part of the reason lies in the physical nature of ancient books. Unlike modern printed volumes produced in massive numbers, ancient texts usually existed in relatively few copies. Every reproduction required labor. Someone had to sit down and copy each word by hand. A mistake could alter the text. A lack of interest could halt reproduction entirely. The survival chain was fragile. Break it once and a book could vanish. Break it repeatedly across centuries and entire libraries could disappear from history. Yet the losses themselves leave clues. Ancient authors often mention books that no longer exist. Catalogues record collections that have vanished. References buried in surviving texts point toward immense literary landscapes hidden beyond the edge of the historical record. Occasionally a discovery illuminates one small corner of that darkness. Archaeologists uncover fragments. Scholars decipher damaged manuscripts. New technologies reveal writing previously thought unreadable. Each discovery reminds modern humanity that the surviving record is incomplete. The missing books are not merely missing objects. They are missing conversations. Somewhere in the ancient world, writers argued over politics, justice, science, religion, art, love, and power. They described landscapes that no longer exist and events remembered nowhere else. They preserved local traditions, regional histories, and personal experiences that have now faded beyond recovery. The lost books of the ancient world represent more than vanished literature. They represent alternate pathways through history itself. Had different texts survived? modern understanding of the past might look very different. Entire civilizations might appear in a new light. Familiar historical figures might seem transformed. Long-settled debates might take unexpected directions. Instead, the surviving record resembles a shattered mosaic. Enough pieces remain to reveal portions of the original image, but vast sections are missing. The eye naturally fills the gaps, yet the gaps remain. And those gaps lead toward one of history's most fascinating journeys, a search through ancient libraries, forgotten archives, ruined cities, buried scrolls, vanished authors, and the fragile chain of survival that determines which voices speak across the centuries and which disappear into silence. Long before great libraries rose beside famous cities, before royal collections filled endless shelves, and before scholars dreamed of gathering all human knowledge into a single place, memory carried most of humanity's understanding. Stories travelled through voices. Laws survived because elders remembered them. Songs passed from one generation to another through repetition. Wisdom lived not in books, but in people. For thousands of years, forgetting was one of civilization's greatest dangers. A skilled storyteller could preserve a history. A respected elder could maintain traditions stretching back generations. Yet memory had limits. Details changed, events blended together. Entire bodies of knowledge could vanish when communities dispersed, or when those entrusted with remembering died. The invention of writing changed that relationship between knowledge and time. The transformation did not happen all at once. It emerged gradually in different regions and cultures, driven by practical needs, long before anyone imagined literary masterpieces. Some of the earliest surviving writing appears not in poetry or philosophy, but in accounting records. Ancient administrators needed ways to track grain, livestock, labor, and trade. Complex societies generated information faster than memory alone could reliably manage. In the cities of ancient Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, scribes began pressing wedge-shaped marks into wet clay thousands of years ago. These marks, known today as cuneiform, created one of humanity's earliest writing systems. At first, the symbols often represented goods, quantities, and transactions. Yet once a society possesses a method for recording information, the possibilities expand rapidly. Writing begins as a tool. It becomes a revolution. Soon records extend beyond commerce. Laws are written down. Religious traditions take physical form. Royal achievements are preserved. Myths once spoken aloud gain permanence. Human thought acquires a new kind of memory, one that exists outside the mind. Ancient Egypt follows a similar path. Along the Nile, scribes develop complex systems of hieroglyphic and later hieratic writing. Temples, palaces, and administrative centers become repositories of information. Papyrus made from reeds growing along the river provides a lighter and more flexible writing surface than clay tablets. The physical appearance of knowledge begins to change. Instead of information carved into stone or impressed into clay, words can now travel on rolled sheets. Documents become portable. Collections become possible. Ideas can move across considerable distances. Yet literacy remains rare. Writing is difficult to master. Scribes spend years learning hundreds of symbols and conventions. In many ancient societies, literacy becomes a specialized profession. Scribes occupy an unusual position. They're not necessarily rulers, warriors, or priests, yet they possess skills essential to all three groups. The ability to write grants access to power. Ancient records often reveal the respect afforded to trained scribes. They manage archives, maintain legal documents, record taxes, draft correspondence, and preserve cultural traditions. Through their hands passes much of what later generations will know about their civilizations. Ironically, much of their work survives only because of accident. Clay tablets prove remarkably durable when fired by intense heat. Buildings destroyed by war sometimes preserve archives rather than destroy them. Fires that consume wooden structures can harden clay documents into lasting artifacts. Archaeologists excavating ancient Mesopotamian cities frequently uncover thousands of tablets that endured precisely because catastrophe struck. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives suggests astonishing quantities of written material. Administrative records alone fill vast collections. Beyond them lie literary works, legal codes, scientific observations, religious texts, and diplomatic correspondence. Many ancient archives resemble the nervous systems of early states. Information flows inward and outward. Officials record harvests, kings send orders, merchants track goods, priests document rituals. Every document strengthens the ability of governments to manage increasingly complex societies. As writing spreads, something unexpected occurs. Humanity begins recording not only practical information but imagination. Stories once dependent on memory become fixed in written form. Among the most famous examples is the Epic of Gilgamesh, whose roots extend deep into Mesopotamian tradition. Although surviving versions differ, and scholars continue debating aspects of its development, the work demonstrates a profound shift. Writing is no longer merely preserving transactions, it is preserving literature. A story can now outlive everyone who originally told it. This development changes civilization in ways difficult to overstate. Knowledge no longer depends entirely on uninterrupted oral transmission. A writer can communicate across centuries. An idea can survive political change. A poem can travel beyond the region where it was composed. Yet preservation remains far from guaranteed. Ancient books are vulnerable from the moment they are created. Papyrus decays. Ink fades. Moisture destroys manuscripts. Insects consume organic materials. Human conflict scatters archives. Every text requires ongoing care if it is to endure. The creation of writing solves one problem while introducing another. Knowledge can now survive beyond memory, but only if someone continues preserving the physical object. Throughout the ancient Near East archives emerge as centers of accumulated information. Some belong to palaces, others serve temples. Still others function within administrative complexes. Shelves hold tablets arranged according to purpose. Documents are catalogued. Records are stored for future consultation. The scene feels surprisingly familiar. People often imagine ancient civilizations as distant and fundamentally different from the modern world. Yet within these archives recognizable concerns appear. Officials struggle with organization. Administrators worry about record keeping. Scholars collect texts. Institutions attempt to manage growing quantities of information. The desire to preserve knowledge is already visible. By the second millennium before the Common Era, major centers of learning contain substantial collections of written material. The famous library assembled by the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal centuries later becomes one of the best-known examples. Thousands of tablets survive from this collection, preserving myths, medical texts, astronomical observations, lexical lists, and scholarly works. Even this remarkable archive represents only a fraction of what once existed. For every collection discovered, countless others disappeared. Entire cities vanish beneath sand soil or modern settlements. Organic writing materials often decay completely. What survives tends to survive unevenly, creating distortions in the historical record. Some civilizations appear unusually well documented because their archives endured by chance. Others seem silent because their records vanished. Scholars still debate the scale of these losses. No single explanation fully accounts for the gaps. Climate warfare, preservation conditions, political change, and simple bad luck all play roles. The result is a historical landscape filled with missing rooms and collapsed corridors. Yet amid these uncertainties, one pattern emerges clearly. As writing becomes more widespread, human beings develop a new relationship with knowledge itself. Information is no longer merely inherited, it can be accumulated, compared, copied, stored, retrieved, expanded. The foundations of libraries are beginning to appear, not yet the grand institutions that later generations will celebrate, but something equally important, the realization that preserving text creates power. A ruler with archives governs more effectively. A temple with records maintains continuity. A scholar with access to earlier writings can build upon previous generations rather than starting anew. Civilization begins constructing memory outside the human mind. That achievement will eventually inspire ambitious dreams. Some rulers and scholars will seek not merely to preserve knowledge, but to gather all knowledge. They will imagine collections so vast that every important text can be found in one place. They will send agents across seas and deserts searching for books. They will compete to acquire manuscripts from distant lands. And from that ambition will emerge some of the most extraordinary libraries the ancient world has ever known. The first great libraries do not appear suddenly. They emerge from centuries of accumulated habits, administrative needs, religious traditions, and scholarly curiosity. Long before the famous collections of the classical world attract admiration, earlier civilizations are already gathering texts, organizing archives, and preserving written knowledge on a scale that would have seemed astonishing to their ancestors. In the ancient world, information is valuable. It helps rulers govern, priests perform rituals, merchants conduct trade, and scholars understand the world around them. Yet information scattered across hundreds of locations is difficult to use. As collections grow, a new idea begins to take shape. Knowledge becomes more powerful when it's gathered together. The earliest large collections often serve practical purposes rather than intellectual ones. Palace archives contain diplomatic correspondence, tax records, legal decisions, and reports from distant provinces. Temple repositories preserve sacred texts, ritual instructions, astronomical observations, and administrative documents connected to religious institutions. These collections are not libraries in the modern sense, but they represent an important step toward that future. One of the most remarkable examples appears in the ancient Near East. In the 7th century before the Common Era, the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal establishes an enormous collection of texts at Nineveh. Unlike many rulers remembered primarily for military campaigns, Ashurbanipal possesses a strong interest in scholarship. Ancient inscriptions suggest that he takes pride in his literacy and education. He seeks not only political power but intellectual authority. His agents gather texts from across the Assyrian Empire and beyond. Scribes copy works from older collections. Specialists preserve myths, religious writings, medical texts, scholarly commentaries, dictionaries, and astronomical records. The resulting archive becomes one of the most important collections of ancient literature ever assembled. Ironically, much of it survives because Nineveh falls. In 612 before the Common Era, a coalition of enemies destroys the Assyrian capital. Buildings collapse, fires rage, the empire itself disintegrates. Yet many clay tablets endure. The intense heat hardens them, helping preserve thousands of texts that might otherwise have vanished. Archaeologists excavating the site in the 19th century uncover a treasure hidden beneath the ruins. Among the discoveries are substantial portions of the Epic of Gilgamesh and many other works that would have been lost forever without this unlikely combination of destruction and preservation. The story reveals a recurring theme in the history of ancient books. Sometimes catastrophe destroys knowledge. Sometimes catastrophe preserves it. The same event can accomplish both. While Mesopotamian archives preserve information on clay tablets, other regions increasingly rely on more fragile materials. Papyrus becomes especially important around the Mediterranean world. It is lighter than clay, easier to transport, and better suited for lengthy texts. Scrolls can contain histories, philosophical works, poems, scientific observations, and religious writings. Yet papyrus has a weakness. Unlike clay, it rarely survives for millennia except under unusually favourable conditions. Dry deserts may preserve it. Most environments do not. Entire libraries copied onto papyrus can disappear almost completely, leaving only indirect traces behind. This difference profoundly shapes what modern historians know about the ancient world. Mesopotamian civilization appears unusually rich in surviving records, partly because clay tablets endure. Many Mediterranean libraries relied on materials far less likely to survive. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars continue debating the extent of what has been lost, but preservation conditions have clearly influenced historical memory. Across the ancient world, collections continue growing. Egyptian temples maintain archives stretching across generations. Hittite administrators preserve diplomatic correspondence and legal records. Cities throughout the eastern Mediterranean accumulate documents necessary for governing increasingly complex societies. Knowledge is becoming institutional. Instead of belonging solely to individuals, it increasingly belongs to organizations. Temples, palaces, and scholarly communities develop systems for preserving texts beyond a single lifetime. This transition marks one of the most significant developments in intellectual history. For the first time, civilizations begin creating memories designed to outlive their creators. The process is not perfect. Fires still occur, buildings collapse, political upheavals scatter collections. Yet each generation adds another layer to an expanding network of written knowledge. As trade routes connect distant regions, ideas travel farther than ever before. A text copied in one city may eventually reach another hundreds of miles away. Religious traditions spread. Scientific observations circulate. Literary styles influence neighboring cultures. Books become travelers. A scroll carried aboard a merchant ship may cross seas. A diplomatic envoy may transport documents between courts. Scholars moving between cities bring copies of texts with them. The ancient world grows increasingly interconnected through writing. This circulation creates opportunities for preservation. If multiple copies exist in different locations, a text has a better chance of surviving disaster. A fire may destroy one archive while another copy remains safe elsewhere. Yet this protection is limited. Copying remains expensive and labor-intensive. Many works exist in only a handful of copies. Some may exist in only one. The fragility of that situation becomes easier to appreciate when imagining the chain required for survival. A text must be written. It must be copied before deterioration makes the original unreadable. Those copies must themselves be copied. Generation after generation, people must decide that the work remains worth preserving. If interest fades, the chain breaks. This reality affects not only obscure works but potentially important ones as well. Popularity changes over time. Political priorities shift. Religious beliefs evolve. Languages transform. A text admired by one era may seem irrelevant to another. Ancient libraries therefore perform a role beyond simple storage. They serve as guardians against cultural amnesia. Within their collections survive voices that might otherwise disappear. Histories preserve memories of earlier generations. Literary works carry stories across centuries. Scientific writings transmit observations and methods. Philosophical texts keep debates alive long after the participants are gone. The ambition behind these collections continues growing. Rulers recognize the prestige associated with knowledge. Scholars dream of access to wider ranges of texts. Cities compete for cultural influence. Collecting books becomes both an intellectual and political project. Some leaders begin imagining something unprecedented. Instead of preserving selected works, why not gather everything? Why not create a collection so vast that all known knowledge can be found within its walls? The dream is extraordinary, especially in an age when every text must be copied by hand. Yet the idea takes hold. Across the Mediterranean, powerful kingdoms emerge from the conquests of great empires. Wealth flows through trade networks linking continents. Scholars move between courts seeking patronage. The conditions are forming for a new kind of institution. Soon on the coast of Egypt, a city founded by a conqueror will become the centre of one of history's most ambitious intellectual experiments. Its rulers will attempt something never before achieved on such a scale. They will seek to gather the wisdom of the world itself, and in doing so they will create a legend so powerful that its loss will echo across more than 2,000 years of history. On the Mediterranean coast, where the Nile approaches the sea and trade routes connect Africa, Asia, and Europe, a new city rises from ambition. Its founder never truly knows what it will become. When Alexander the Great establishes Alexandria in the 4th century before the Common Era, he's building one city among many within a rapidly expanding empire. Yet after his death, the city begins a transformation that will make it one of the most famous centers of learning in human history. Under the rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Alexandria becomes more than a political capital. It becomes a cultural project. Wealth flows into its harbours, merchants arrive from distant lands, philosophers, mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, poets, and scholars gather within its walls. The city becomes a meeting place for ideas from across the known world. At the heart of this intellectual ambition lies a dream unlike anything attempted before. The dream is simple to describe but extraordinarily difficult to achieve. Collect every book, not merely the important books, not merely local texts, not merely works from a single language or tradition. Everything. The vision behind the Library of Alexandria is astonishing even by modern standards. Its founders seek nothing less than a comprehensive collection of human knowledge. In an age when every manuscript must be copied by hand, the scale of such an undertaking borders on the unimaginable. Yet they pursue it with remarkable determination. Ancient accounts, although sometimes exaggerated, describe aggressive efforts to acquire texts. Ships entering Alexandria's harbour reportedly have their books examined. Manuscripts are borrowed, copied, and sometimes retained. Agents travel abroad searching for valuable works. Scholars compete to acquire texts from distant regions. The exact details remain debated. Ancient sources occasionally mix fact with legend, and historians must separate evidence from later embellishment. No single explanation fully accounts for every story surrounding the library. Some accounts likely exaggerate its practices and holdings. Others may preserve genuine memories of extraordinary efforts. What survives in the record suggests a collection of immense scale. The exact number of scrolls remains uncertain. Ancient estimates vary widely, and scholars continue debating their reliability. Some figures mention hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Whether those numbers represent individual works, copies, or catalogue entries remains unclear. Regardless of the precise total, the library is enormous by ancient standards. Its significance extends beyond size. The institution represents a new idea about knowledge itself. Earlier archives often served governments, temples, or administrative systems. Alexandria aims at something broader. It seeks to gather, organize, compare, and study information from many cultures. Knowledge becomes an international enterprise. Inside the city, scholars work on projects that shape intellectual history for centuries. Texts are compared and edited, commentaries are written, catalogues are compiled, linguistic studies flourish, scientific inquiry advances, literary criticism develops into a sophisticated discipline. Among the most influential figures associated with Alexandria is the poet and scholar Callimachus. His work includes an enormous catalogue known as the Penakes, often considered one of the earliest large-scale library classification systems. Although the catalogue itself has not survived, references suggest it organises authors and works into categories, helping scholars navigate an immense collection. Even the tools for managing knowledge are evolving. The library becomes part of a larger scholarly environment known as the Mausion, often translated as the museum. This institution functions as a research centre where scholars live, study and collaborate. The atmosphere resembles aspects of later universities and research institutes, although the ancient context remains unique. For generations, Alexandria attracts some of the brightest minds of the Mediterranean world. Mathematicians explore geometry, astronomers study the heavens, physicians investigate anatomy and disease, geographers attempt to measure the earth, poets refine literary traditions, historians compile records of earlier ages. The city becomes a machine for preserving and generating knowledge. Yet hidden beneath this achievement lies a troubling reality. Even at its height, Alexandria cannot collect everything. The ancient world is vast. Languages are numerous. Texts circulate unevenly. Some works never reach Egypt. Others remain in private collections. Many are already lost before the library can acquire them. The dream of universal knowledge is impossible, but the attempt itself changes history. For perhaps the first time on such a scale, an institution deliberately pursues the preservation of human intellectual heritage across cultural boundaries. The goal is not merely to protect local traditions, but to gather knowledge wherever it can be found. This ambition helps create the library's enduring reputation. Centuries later, people remember Alexandria not simply as a building, but as an idea. The idea that all knowledge might be collected. The idea that wisdom from different civilizations belongs together. The idea that humanity's intellectual achievements deserve preservation. Ironically, this very fame creates one of history's greatest legends. Most people know Alexandria not because it existed, but because it disappeared. The image is familiar. Flames consume shelves, scrolls burn, knowledge vanishes in a single catastrophic event. Civilization loses countless treasures overnight. It is a powerful story. The problem is that the historical reality appears far more complicated. Scholars still debate exactly what happened to the Library of Alexandria. The evidence remains fragmented. Ancient sources disagree. Some accounts were written centuries after the events they describe. Others contain contradictions. There is no universally accepted single moment of destruction. Instead, the library may have suffered multiple setbacks across different periods. During Julius Caesar's campaign in Egypt in 48 before the Common Era, fires damaged parts of Alexandria. Some ancient sources suggest books are lost. The scale of the damage remains uncertain. Later political instability affects the city. Economic changes influence cultural institutions. Religious conflicts reshape intellectual life. Administrative support fluctuates. Rather than one dramatic ending, the library may experience a long decline. Knowledge often disappears this way. Not through a single catastrophe, but through cumulative neglect, disruption, and gradual erosion. Collections shrink, buildings deteriorate, funding disappears, copying slows, books vanish one by one. The romantic image of a single night of destruction is easier to remember. The reality may be more tragic because it unfolds slowly, almost invisibly. Yet regardless of how the library declines, its symbolic importance grows. The loss of Alexandria becomes a metaphor for all lost knowledge. Whenever historians encounter a vanished text, the library seems to linger in the background. Whenever archaeologists uncover fragments of forgotten works, they are reminded of collections that no longer exist. Whenever scholars reconstruct ancient literature from scattered quotations, they confront the same fundamental absence. The shelves are gone. The catalogues are gone. Most of the books are gone. What remains is the shadow they cast across history, and Alexandria is only the most famous example. Across the ancient world, countless other collections face similar dangers. Some disappear in wars, others collapse with empires, others fade as languages change and cultures transform. The dream of preserving knowledge proves powerful. The reality proves fragile. Soon the story will move beyond Alexandria into a wider landscape of lost archives, burned cities, abandoned libraries and civilizations whose written voices gradually fall silent, leaving only fragments behind. A scroll begins dying the moment it is created. The process is invisible at first. Fresh ink dries across a carefully prepared writing surface. The text appears stable, complete, and permanent. A reader unrolls the manuscript and encounters ideas that may have required years to compose. The author has succeeded in capturing thoughts outside the mind. The words now exist as physical objects. Yet time is already at work. Unlike stone monuments, bronze statues, or massive walls, books in the ancient world are fragile. They depend on materials that belong to the living world. Papyrus comes from plants. Parchment comes from animal skins. Wooden writing tablets crack and warp. Ink fades. Fibers weaken. Moisture seeps into storage rooms. Insects consume organic material. Mice gnaw through containers. Mold spreads quietly across surfaces. Knowledge survives only as long as its physical body survives. This simple reality shapes the entire history of ancient literature. Modern readers often underestimate the challenge because books today are abundant. A popular work may exist in millions of copies. Digital versions can be stored across multiple continents simultaneously. If one copy is damaged, thousands of others remain. The ancient world operates differently. A book often exists in very small numbers. Every copy requires labor. Every reproduction consumes time, resources, and skilled effort. The loss of a few manuscripts can place an entire work in danger. The loss of the final copy means extinction. In many ways, ancient books resemble endangered species. Their survival depends upon continuous reproduction. Without copying, they disappear. The process begins with the writing materials themselves. Throughout much of the Mediterranean world, papyrus serves as the dominant medium for literary texts. Produced primarily in Egypt, papyrus is lightweight, relatively practical and well suited for scrolls. It allows large quantities of text to be stored and transported, yet papyrus is far from durable. In dry environments, it can survive for centuries. In humid climates, it deteriorates much more rapidly. Water is particularly destructive. A leaking roof, seasonal flooding, or prolonged dampness can damage collections beyond recovery. Even under favorable conditions, papyrus ages. Fibers become brittle, edges crumble. Repeated handling causes wear. The simple act of reading contributes to deterioration. Every reader leaves traces. This creates a paradox. The books most valued by a society are often those most heavily used. The more frequently a manuscript is consulted, the more quickly it may wear out. Preservation, therefore, depends upon continual copying. Readers need replacements before existing copies become unreadable. Entire professions emerge around this necessity. Ancient scribes spent countless hours reproducing text by hand. In scriptoria workshops, temples, schools, and private households, individuals labor over manuscripts line by line. The work requires concentration and patience. Errors must be minimized. Handwriting must remain legible. The text must survive accurately enough for future readers. The image of a lone scribe bent over a manuscript captures only part of the reality. Copying becomes one of the most important acts of cultural preservation in human history. Every surviving ancient text owes its existence to generations of copyists. Some of those copyists know exactly what they're preserving. Others may simply be completing assigned tasks. Regardless of motivation, they form an unbroken chain stretching across centuries. Break the chain and a work vanishes. Sometimes the reasons are practical. A manuscript becomes too damaged to copy. A library loses funding. A school closes. A city declines economically. Political instability disrupts intellectual life. Sometimes the reasons are cultural. Languages evolve, readers lose interest in older styles. New literary fashions emerge, religious priorities change, educational systems shift focus. A text that seems essential in one century may appear irrelevant in another. The evidence remains incomplete, but surviving records suggest that many works disappear not because anyone deliberately destroys them, but because nobody chooses to preserve them. Neglect can be as effective as fire. A neglected manuscript sits untouched on a shelf. Its fibers weaken, ink fades, no replacement is produced. Eventually it becomes unreadable. Then it is gone. Across the ancient world, libraries constantly battle these threats. Collections require maintenance. Storage conditions matter. Cataloguing systems must be updated. Damaged texts need replacement. Skilled personnel must remain available. The effort is endless. Unlike a temple built from stone, a library is never truly finished. Its contents are always aging. Its preservation demands continuous attention. The challenge becomes even greater when considering transportation. Ancient books travel extensively. Merchants carry texts across seas. Scholars transport manuscripts between cities. Diplomats exchange documents. Teachers bring books to new communities. Travel creates opportunities for intellectual exchange. It also creates risks. Ships sink. Caravans disappear. Wars interrupt trade routes. Theft occurs. Containers are damaged during journeys. Entire collections vanish while moving from one location to another. A single storm at sea may erase years of scholarly work. Such losses rarely leave evidence. Most disappearances occur without documentation. Historians encounter only the final result: a text once mentioned in records is no longer available. The circumstances remain unknown. Sometimes natural disasters intervene. Earthquakes collapse. Buildings containing archives. Floods destroy repositories. Fires spread rapidly through structures filled with combustible materials. Volcanic eruptions bury settlements beneath ash and debris. The ancient world is filled with hazards. Knowledge must survive all of them. And even when manuscripts avoid physical destruction, another danger remains: human attention. Ancient societies continuously decide which books deserve preservation. Resources are limited. Copying takes time. Storage space is finite. Not every text can receive equal treatment. Choices must be made. Those choices shape the historical record more profoundly than many people realize. A philosophical treatise copied repeatedly survives. A local history copied only once may disappear. A famous poet reaches future generations. A lesser-known contemporary vanishes completely. Over time, survival begins creating its own momentum. Popular texts attract more copies. More copies increase the chances of preservation. Rare texts become increasingly vulnerable. The process resembles natural selection operating within literature, not necessarily selecting the best works, often selecting the luckiest. Scholars still debate how much has been lost through this mechanism alone. No single explanation fully accounts for the disappearance of ancient literature, but the cumulative effects of material decay, shifting priorities, and interrupted copying appear enormous. The surviving record suggests a world once crowded with books now reduced to fragments. What remains often survives against overwhelming odds. A manuscript copied at precisely the right moment. A scroll stored in unusually dry conditions. A collection protected during political upheaval. A text adopted by influential educational traditions. Chance repeatedly shapes survival. This realization transforms every surviving ancient book into something remarkable. It is not merely a source of information. It is evidence of successful passage through countless hazards. Behind every surviving work stand generations of individuals who copied, protected, transported, stored, and valued it enough to keep it alive. Yet many libraries face dangers greater than age or neglect. Empires rise and fall. Armies march, cities burn, and when entire civilizations enter periods of conflict and collapse, books often become casualties alongside buildings, monuments, and human lives. The next great losses will not occur quietly on forgotten shelves. They will unfold amid conquest, invasion, destruction, and the violent transformations that reshape the ancient world. The image has become one of history's most enduring symbols. A great library burns, flames climb through wooden beams, smoke pours into the sky, shelves collapse beneath intense heat, scrolls blacken, curl, and disappear into ash. Knowledge accumulated across generations vanishes in a matter of hours. The scene is powerful because it feels understandable. One catastrophe, one disaster, one identifiable moment when civilization loses something irreplaceable. Reality is rarely so simple. Yet throughout the ancient world, war repeatedly places books in danger. Armies do not merely destroy buildings, they disrupt the institutions that preserve knowledge. Libraries depend upon stability. They require funding personnel, storage facilities, and networks of scholars and copyists. Conflict threatens all of these at once. Sometimes books burn. More often, the systems that keep books alive collapse. The story unfolds across centuries and continents. Great cities rise as centers of learning and then decline. Empires expand, fragment, and disappear. Political borders shift. New rulers inherit old collections, sometimes preserving them, sometimes neglecting them. Each transition introduces uncertainty. The ancient world contains many libraries beyond Alexandria. Some are famous, many are almost forgotten today. Their losses receive far less attention, yet together they account for an enormous portion of the vanished literary landscape. In Mesopotamia, archives survive for centuries within palace complexes and administrative centers. Some endure because clay tablets prove resilient. Others disappear when cities are abandoned or destroyed. The fall of political systems often interrupts the networks responsible for maintaining collections. Texts may physically survive for a time. Eventually, however, they require readers. Without readers, preservation becomes increasingly unlikely. Across the eastern Mediterranean, successive waves of conflict reshape cultural geography. Cities change hands. Trade routes shift. Economic resources move elsewhere. Libraries dependent upon local prosperity find themselves vulnerable. A library is not merely a building. It is a living institution. Once that institution weakens, the books inside begin facing new risks. The Hellenistic world that follows Alexander's conquest creates extraordinary opportunities for scholarship, yet it is also politically unstable. Rival kingdoms compete for territory and influence. Wars occur repeatedly. Cities experience sieges. Administrative priorities change. Many collections disappear during these transitions, leaving little evidence behind. Sometimes only a passing reference survives. A historian mentions a library that no longer exists. An inscription records a donation of books. A scholar refers to texts once available in a collection now lost. These fragments hint at a much larger world of vanished archives. The Roman Republic and later the Roman Empire introduced new dynamics. Rome becomes one of the largest political systems the Mediterranean has ever seen. Wealth flows into major urban centers. Public and private libraries expand. Elite households accumulate substantial collections. Books circulate more widely than before. For a time, the prospects for preservation seem promising. Yet the same interconnectedness that spreads knowledge also creates vulnerabilities. Political crises affect large regions simultaneously. Civil wars disrupt intellectual life. Economic decline reduces resources available for copying and maintaining texts. Local disasters affect collections concentrated in major urban centers. Fire remains a constant threat. Ancient cities are crowded places. Buildings often contain large quantities of combustible material. Oil lamps provide illumination. Heating systems generate risk. Storage facilities packed with scrolls can become tinderboxes. Several Roman libraries suffer damage or destruction through fires over the centuries. The details are often uncertain because surviving sources provide incomplete information. Historians must piece together scattered references and archaeological evidence. What emerges is not a single catastrophe but a recurring pattern. Collections are lost, others are rebuilt. New libraries appear, older ones disappear, knowledge survives unevenly. Meanwhile, beyond the Mediterranean heartland, other traditions face their own challenges. Written cultures flourish across Asia, North Africa, and the Near East. Archives preserve local histories, religious writings, scientific observations, and literary works. Yet political upheaval repeatedly threatens these collections. Some losses are documented, many are not. The evidence remains incomplete because destruction often removes the records that would have described the destruction. This creates a frustrating paradox for historians. The most devastating losses frequently leave the fewest traces. If an archive survives, scholars can study it. If an archive disappears completely, reconstructing its contents becomes extraordinarily difficult. Occasionally, archaeology provides glimpses into what has vanished. Excavations uncover storage rooms once filled with documents. Catalogue fragments reveal the existence of collections. References in surviving texts point toward libraries that no longer exist. The pattern is consistent. Ancient civilization produces far more written material than survives today. War contributes significantly to the losses, but not always in obvious ways. Consider a city captured by an invading army. The conquerors may not intentionally destroy books, yet the consequences of conquest can still prove disastrous. Funding disappears, scholars flee, administrative structures collapse, buildings fall into disrepair. The copying of manuscripts slows or ceases entirely. Within a few generations, collections begin shrinking. The damage accumulates quietly. Knowledge often dies after the battle is over. One of the less appreciated aspects of ancient warfare is its impact on continuity. Libraries depend upon stable chains of transmission. Teachers train students, scribes train apprentices, catalogues guide readers, institutions preserve expertise. Conflict interrupts these relationships. When skilled individuals are displaced or killed, knowledge itself becomes vulnerable. A manuscript may survive physically while the ability to understand it fades. Languages evolve, scripts change, specialized knowledge disappears. The text remains on the shelf, but fewer people can interpret it. Eventually, even preservation becomes difficult. The history of lost books therefore extends beyond physical destruction. It includes intellectual fragmentation. Entire traditions of reading can vanish. Once that occurs, surviving texts become increasingly inaccessible. Scholars still debate the extent to which these processes contributed to literary losses in different regions and periods. No single explanation fully accounts for the disappearance of ancient knowledge. Some works perish in fires, others vanish through neglect, others survive physically but become unreadable. The outcome is often the same: silence. By late antiquity, the Mediterranean world is undergoing profound transformation. Political systems are changing, religious landscapes are evolving, economic networks are shifting. Some libraries continue functioning, others decline. New centers of learning emerge while older institutions fade. The losses accumulate gradually. A collection damaged here, a manuscript uncopied there, a library abandoned elsewhere. Viewed individually, each event appears manageable. Viewed across centuries, they become enormous. Entire cities lose their written voices. Generations of authors disappear from memory. Countless works cease to exist. Yet amid this growing silence, certain names continue appearing in surviving records. Historians encounter references to remarkable writers whose books once circulated widely. Their reputations remain visible, their influence is acknowledged, Their titles are recorded, but their works are gone. The next stage of the mystery lies not in destroyed buildings or vanished libraries, but in the ghostly presence of authors who are still remembered, even though almost everything they wrote has disappeared. The ancient world is crowded with ghosts. Not the ghosts of people in the supernatural sense, but the ghosts of voices. Historians encounter them constantly. A name appears in a surviving manuscript. Another author praises a forgotten work. A catalogue lists dozens of titles. A scholar summarizes an argument. A poet alludes to a famous book that everyone once knew. Then the trail ends. The author remains. The books are gone. In some cases, only a name survives. In others, a handful of sentences. Occasionally, an entire reputation reaches the present, while the work responsible for that reputation has vanished completely. The result is one of the strangest features of ancient literary history. Modern humanity knows many ancient writers primarily through absence. One of the most remarkable examples is the Greek playwright Sophocles. Unlike many lost authors, some of his works survive. Plays such as Oedipus Rex and Antigone remain among the most studied pieces of literature in history. Yet ancient sources indicate that Sophocles wrote well over 100 plays. Only a tiny fraction survives. The same pattern appears repeatedly. The surviving works create the impression of preservation. The broader reality reveals loss. Another great tragedian, Aeschylus, reportedly writes around 70 to 90 plays. Only 7 survive. Euripides produces dozens of dramas. Most disappear. The foundations of Greek theatre, one of the most influential literary traditions in history, reach the modern world through scattered remnants. It is as if future generations knew only a few chapters from an entire shelf of novels. The scale of disappearance becomes even more dramatic when examining ancient historians. Many historians record events now known only through later summaries. Their original works vanish. Sometimes another writer quotes them extensively. Sometimes only brief references remain. Consider the case of Hecataeus of Miletus, an early Greek historian and geographer. His writings influence later generations, yet only fragments survive. Historians reconstruct portions of his thought from quotations preserved by other authors centuries later. The original books are gone. What remains are echoes. The same is true for countless others. Ancient scholars often build upon earlier works that no longer exist. They cite sources, challenge predecessors, and preserve snippets of lost texts. Ironically, many forgotten authors survive because someone else disagrees with them. A criticism becomes a lifeline. A quotation becomes a rescue. A passing reference becomes evidence that a vanished book once existed. This process has transformed the work of modern historians into something resembling detective work. Scholars gather fragments scattered across hundreds of surviving texts. Tiny clues are assembled into larger pictures. Sometimes a lost work can be partially reconstructed from quotations alone. More often only shadows emerge. Among the most famous lost historians is the Roman writer Livy. Unlike many vanished authors, a significant portion of his work survives. Yet even here the losses are staggering. Livy composes a monumental history of Rome consisting of 142 books. Only 35 survive substantially intact. More than 100 books disappear. Those missing volumes likely contain detailed accounts of crucial periods in Roman history. Historians possess summaries and references, but the original narratives are gone. Entire generations of eyewitness testimony vanish with them. Another striking example is the historian Tacitus. Several important works survive, making him one of the most influential Roman authors. Yet significant portions of his historical writings are missing. Critical years of Roman history become harder to understand because sections of his work disappear somewhere along the chain of transmission. These losses are not merely literary. They affect historical knowledge itself. Every missing historian removes a perspective, Every vanished account narrows the range of evidence available to later generations. Modern understanding of the ancient world depends heavily upon whichever sources happen to survive. The surviving record may not be representative. This realization creates an uncomfortable possibility. Some of the most insightful ancient historians may be completely lost. Some of the most original thinkers may have vanished without leaving enough evidence for modern scholars even to recognize their importance. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives suggests a literary world far richer than the one visible today. Philosophy presents a similar mystery. Many people know the names Plato and Aristotle because substantial portions of their works survive. Yet even here, preservation is selective. Numerous philosophical schools flourish throughout antiquity. Some leave extensive records. Others survive only through hostile descriptions written by rivals. An entire tradition may be reduced to a paragraph. A sophisticated argument may survive only as a criticism. Generations of intellectual debate disappear. The situation becomes even more dramatic when examining scientific and technical writing. Ancient astronomers observe the skies. Physicians record treatments and theories. Mathematicians develop new methods. Engineers describe machines and construction techniques. Geographers compile information about distant lands. Most of these writings are gone. Some survive indirectly through later authors who borrow from them. Others leave traces in translations. Many vanish almost completely. The loss does not necessarily mean that ancient discoveries disappear forever. Ideas often migrate into other texts. Concepts survive even when original works do not. Yet the details, explanations, evidence, and intellectual context frequently vanish. It is like inheriting conclusions without receiving the notebooks that explain how those conclusions were reached. Poetry suffers similar losses. Ancient readers once enjoyed enormous bodies of literature now inaccessible. Entire genres flourish and disappear. Famous poets command admiration across generations before gradually slipping from view. One of the strangest examples involves Sappho. She becomes one of the most celebrated lyric poets of ancient Greece. Her reputation remains extraordinary for centuries. Ancient critics rank her among the greatest poets who ever lived. Yet most of her work vanishes. For generations, scholars know her largely through fragments, isolated lines, damaged verses, and quotations preserved by others. Only much later do archaeological discoveries recover additional portions of her poetry. Even then, most of her writings remain lost. The pattern repeats across cultures and centuries. Names survive. Titles survive. Fragments survive. Books do not. Sometimes the surviving evidence is almost painfully tantalizing. A catalogue lists dozens of works by a respected author. Another source praises their brilliance. Readers across the ancient world apparently admire the books. None survive. Modern historians are left staring at empty spaces. The silence becomes especially haunting when considering the cumulative scale of loss. Each missing author represents years of labor, observation, imagination, and thought. Thousands of individuals dedicate their lives to writing. Most leave little or no trace. Civilizations that once seemed crowded with voices become strangely quiet. Yet not every lost book vanishes completely. Some escape destruction through extraordinary circumstances. Buried beneath volcanic ash, sealed inside tombs, hidden in desert sands, forgotten in remote places where chance preserves what history otherwise destroys. Against overwhelming odds, a few books find refuge, and when archaeologists eventually uncover them, entire pieces of the ancient world can suddenly speak again. Most lost books remain lost. Their pages have dissolved. Their ink has faded. Their final copies disappeared centuries ago. Historians know they once existed, but no excavation is likely to bring them back. Time has already completed its work. Yet every so often the earth refuses to surrender its secrets completely. A buried room is opened. A sealed container is discovered. A forgotten archive emerges from sand, ash, or rubble. Suddenly voices believed lost begin speaking again. These moments are among the most dramatic events in the history of scholarship. For generations, a text may exist only as a rumour preserved in ancient references. Then a fragment appears, a damaged manuscript surfaces. A cache of documents is uncovered in conditions so unusual that preservation becomes possible against all expectations. The story often begins with accident. Archaeology is filled with discoveries nobody expected to make. Farmers digging foundations uncover buried structures. Workers encounter hidden chambers. Explorers investigating one site stumble upon another. Chance repeatedly intervenes in the search for lost knowledge. One of the most extraordinary examples emerges from the shadow of disaster. In the year 79 of the Common Era, Mount Vesuvius erupts near the Bay of Naples. The eruption destroys several Roman settlements, including Pompeii and Herculaneum. Buildings collapse beneath volcanic material. Thousands perish. Entire neighborhoods disappear beneath ash and debris. For centuries, the buried cities remain hidden. Then, during excavations many generations later, archaeologists begin uncovering an astonishing world frozen in time. Among the discoveries is a luxurious Roman villa at Herculaneum. Inside, researchers encounter something almost unimaginable: a library. The collection becomes known today as the Villa of the Papyri. Hundreds of scrolls survive within the building. At first glance, however, survival seems like the wrong word. The scrolls resemble lumps of blackened charcoal. Intense heat from the eruption carbonizes them. Many appear unreadable. For a long time, scholars can do little with them. Attempts to unroll some scrolls damage them. Portions crumble. Information is lost during early efforts to recover texts. Yet the discovery remains extraordinary. Here preserved by catastrophe is an ancient library that would almost certainly have vanished under normal circumstances. The eruption destroys the city. The eruption preserves the books. Once again, disaster acts as both executioner and guardian. Modern technology eventually opens new possibilities. Advanced imaging techniques allow researchers to examine carbonized scrolls without physically unrolling them. Progress remains challenging, but each improvement raises hopes that additional texts may someday be recovered. Scholars still debate the full significance of the collection. Most identified works appear connected to philosophy, particularly the Epicurean tradition. Yet the possibility remains that other texts lie hidden among the damaged scrolls. The evidence remains incomplete. The library continues yielding information more than 19 centuries after the eruption. Elsewhere, preservation depends not on volcanic ash but on climate. Egypt becomes one of the greatest sources of surviving ancient manuscripts because its deserts provide unusually favorable conditions. Dry environments slow the decay that destroys papyrus elsewhere. Documents discarded centuries ago sometimes survive beneath sand long after libraries in wetter regions disappear. The result is remarkable. Archaeologists uncover letters, contracts, tax records, literary text, religious writings, and private correspondence. These discoveries reveal aspects of everyday life often absent from grand historical narratives. Some manuscripts preserve known works. Others preserve unknown ones. Occasionally a text believed lost reappears. The excitement surrounding such discoveries is difficult to exaggerate. Imagine historians knowing the title of a vanished book for centuries. Then imagine finding a surviving copy or fragment. A voice silent for 2,000 years suddenly returns. One of the most famous examples involves poetry. Fragments of Sappho, whose work largely disappears during antiquity, continue emerging through papyrus discoveries. Each new fragment adds details to a literary tradition once thought almost entirely lost. The recovered pieces are often incomplete, but even damaged texts can transform scholarly understanding. A few surviving lines may reshape decades of interpretation. The smallest fragment can matter enormously. Ancient garbage dumps have produced valuable discoveries as well. At first glance, this seems surprising. Yet discarded documents sometimes survive precisely because they are abandoned in dry conditions. Administrative records, personal letters, school exercises, and literary fragments accumulate in ancient refuse deposits. For archaeologists, yesterday's trash can become today's archive. These discoveries reveal something important about lost books. Not all literary survival depends on great libraries. Sometimes preservation occurs far from major centers of learning. A text copied by an ordinary individual may endure when prestigious collections disappear. A discarded manuscript may outlast volumes carefully stored elsewhere. Chance repeatedly overturns expectations. Religious communities also play important roles in preservation. In various regions, manuscripts survive because they are stored within monasteries, temples, or other protected environments. Some collections remain hidden for centuries before being rediscovered. Among the most significant manuscript finds of the 20th century is the discovery near Nag Hammadi in Egypt. A collection of ancient texts buried in sealed containers survives in the desert environment. The manuscripts provide valuable insights into religious traditions and intellectual movements, previously known mainly through hostile descriptions by opponents. Again, forgotten texts return to history. The pattern is familiar. Burial creates survival. Isolation prevents destruction. Neglect becomes protection. The logic appears almost backward. Books preserved through careful use often disappear. Books forgotten in remote places sometimes endure. The Dead Sea Scrolls offer another extraordinary example. Hidden in caves near the Dead Sea, these manuscripts survive for centuries in conditions that protect fragile materials. Their discovery provides invaluable evidence for understanding ancient religious communities, textual traditions, and the broader cultural world of the period. Not every discovery involves complete texts. Most do not. More often, archaeologists recover fragments, tiny pieces of papyrus, damaged parchment leaves, inscriptions broken into multiple parts. The work of reconstruction can take years or decades. Scholars compare handwriting styles, analyze ink composition, study linguistic patterns, match fragments separated by centuries of damage. The process resembles assembling an enormous puzzle with most pieces missing. Sometimes success is limited. Sometimes it is spectacular. A fragment containing only a few lines may confirm the existence of a lost work. A newly identified manuscript may reveal unknown details about an author. A damaged archive may illuminate entire regions of history previously hidden from view. Each discovery serves as a reminder. The ancient world is not completely silent. Its buried books still wait in deserts, caves, ruins, tombs, and forgotten chambers. Most will never be found. Some no longer exist. Yet enough discoveries continue occurring to sustain hope. Beneath layers of earth and centuries of forgetting, traces remain, and even when the books themselves are gone, scholars have learned another remarkable way to pursue them. Hidden inside surviving texts are thousands of clues, quotations, references, summaries, and fragments that allow researchers to reconstruct portions of vanished literature from the shadows it leaves behind. A lost book does not always disappear completely. Sometimes its pages vanish while its words survive. A philosopher quotes a passage. A historian summarizes an earlier account. A commentator copies a sentence into a scholarly discussion. A grammarian uses an example from an older text to explain a difficult word. Centuries later, the original manuscript is gone, but traces remain scattered across other works, like fragments of pottery spread across an archaeological site. For modern scholars, these fragments become invaluable. The recovery of lost literature often begins not with excavation, but with reading. Libraries around the world contain manuscripts copied during late antiquity and the medieval period. Hidden within them are countless references to books that no longer exist. Historians, philologists, and textual scholars spend years tracking these references, comparing passages and attempting to reconstruct what vanished works may once have contained. The process is painstaking. A single sentence preserved by one author may provide the only surviving evidence for an entire book. Yet those sentences accumulate. Gradually patterns emerge. One of the most important sources of lost literature is quotation itself. Ancient writers frequently cite earlier authorities. Sometimes they do so because they admire them, sometimes because they disagree with them, sometimes because they are compiling information from many sources. Their motivations vary. The result is the same. Fragments survive. Consider the historian who wishes to describe an event that occurred centuries before his own lifetime. He consults earlier accounts and incorporates portions into his narrative. If his work survives while the originals disappear, modern readers gain indirect access to those lost sources. A chain of preservation emerges. The surviving text becomes a window into vanished text behind it. This phenomenon is common throughout ancient literature. Much of what historians know about certain lost authors comes from later writers who borrowed from them extensively. Without these intermediaries, entire intellectual traditions would be invisible. The challenge lies in separating the original voice from the later interpretation. A quotation may be accurate, it may be abbreviated, it may be altered intentionally or unintentionally. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars often debate how faithfully later authors preserve earlier material. No single explanation fully accounts for every discrepancy. Even so, fragments provide extraordinary opportunities. Imagine possessing only a handful of pieces from a shattered statue. The complete figure is gone, yet the surviving pieces still reveal something about its appearance. Literary fragments function in much the same way. The whole work cannot be recovered. Parts of it can. One of the most famous examples involves the pre-Socratic philosophers of ancient Greece. Many of these thinkers profoundly influenced the development of Western philosophy, yet few of their original works survive. Instead, modern understanding depends largely upon quotations and reports preserved by later authors. Philosophers writing centuries afterwards summarize their ideas. Critics challenge their arguments. Historians describe their teachings. From these scattered references, scholars reconstruct portions of intellectual traditions that would otherwise be lost entirely. The process is remarkable. Entire philosophical systems are rebuilt from fragments. Not perfectly, of course. Uncertainty remains unavoidable, yet enough survives to reveal the richness of ancient debate. The same approach applies to poetry. Ancient anthologies occasionally preserve isolated verses from otherwise vanished works. Literary critics quote passages they consider particularly beautiful or unusual. Commentators discuss obscure references and preserve lines while explaining them. A few words become lifelines across millennia. Sometimes only a single line survives from a poem once known throughout an entire culture. That line may be all that remains of years of creative effort. Historians encounter similar situations with local chronicles and regional histories. Major political events are often documented by multiple sources, increasing the chances of survival. Local events are more vulnerable. A city historian records the traditions of a particular community. The manuscript disappears. A later author references it briefly. That reference becomes the sole surviving witness to the original work. The loss is immense, yet the fragment still matters. It preserves evidence that the book existed. Occasionally, reconstruction becomes surprisingly extensive. Some lost works survive in hundreds of quotations scattered across dozens of texts. Scholars gather these fragments, compare versions, and arrange them according to probable order. The result is not a complete recovery, but it can provide substantial insight into the original composition. In certain cases, modern editions of lost authors consist almost entirely of collected fragments. Readers encounter pieces rather than complete narratives, a sentence from one source, a paragraph from another, a summary preserved elsewhere. Together they form a literary mosaic assembled from surviving remnants. The image remains incomplete, but enough pieces survive to suggest the original design. Ancient encyclopedias and scholarly compilations prove especially valuable. Writers who attempt to collect knowledge from earlier generations often preserve information unavailable anywhere else. Their works become repositories of fragments from lost books. Pliny the Elder's Natural History, for example, draws upon hundreds of earlier sources. Many of those sources disappear. His references, therefore, preserve traces of a vast intellectual world now largely inaccessible. The irony is striking. Books sometimes survive by becoming part of other books. A text may vanish physically, while portions of its content continue living within later works. Knowledge adapts. Ideas migrate. Words find new homes. Yet reconstruction has limits. A quotation rarely captures an entire argument. A summary cannot reproduce every detail. Context often disappears. Historians may know what a lost author concluded without understanding precisely how those conclusions were reached. The missing portions matter. They may contain evidence, nuance, or alternative interpretations. This is why newly discovered fragments generate such excitement. Even a small addition can alter scholarly understanding. A few recovered lines may clarify a disputed passage. A newly identified manuscript fragment may reveal that earlier reconstructions were incomplete. The search never truly ends. Each generation revisits the evidence using new methods and perspectives. Technology increasingly contributes to the effort. Digital databases allow scholars to compare texts across enormous collections. Imaging techniques reveal damaged writing previously considered unreadable. Statistical tools help identify patterns and possible connections among fragments. The work remains deeply human, however. Someone must still notice the clue. Someone must recognize the quotation. Someone must connect the fragment to the vanished book. The pursuit resembles archaeology conducted within literature itself. Instead of excavating buried cities, scholars excavate buried references. Instead of recovering walls, they recover sentences. Instead of reconstructing buildings, they reconstruct ideas. And as they do, another aspect of the mystery becomes impossible to ignore. Not all books disappear through accident. Some are targeted deliberately. Some are considered dangerous. Some challenge authority, religious beliefs, political systems, or accepted traditions. Across the ancient world, certain texts are not merely neglected or forgotten. They are actively suppressed. Their destruction becomes a choice rather than a consequence of time. And in those moments, the loss of books reveals not only the fragility of knowledge, but the power that knowledge can hold. Not every lost book is a victim of chance. Some disappear because someone wants them gone. Throughout history, rulers, religious authorities, political movements, and competing intellectual traditions have recognized a simple truth. Ideas possess power. They shape beliefs, influence behavior, challenge authority, and preserve alternative ways of understanding the world. A book can outlive a king. A manuscript can survive a government. A text can continue influencing people long after the conditions that produced it have vanished. Because of this, books sometimes become targets. The destruction of written knowledge is almost as old as writing itself. Yet the reality is often more complex than popular images suggest. The ancient world rarely witnesses systematic attempts to erase every copy of a text across vast regions. Such efforts are difficult even in modern societies. More commonly, suppression occurs through a combination of confiscation, censorship, neglect, political pressure, and selective preservation. The result can be just as effective. A book does not need to be burned everywhere. It only needs to stop being copied. Over time, extinction follows. One of the most famous examples comes from ancient China during the reign of the first emperor of a unified Chinese state, Qin Shi Huang. Traditional historical accounts describe efforts to suppress certain writings and intellectual traditions while promoting others. Later sources portray dramatic episodes involving the destruction of books and punishment of scholars. Modern historians continue debating the details. The evidence is complicated, and some ancient accounts may contain exaggeration or political bias. Nevertheless, what survives in the record suggests that state power can significantly influence which texts endure and which disappear. The lesson extends far beyond a single civilization. Across cultures and centuries, authorities often prefer some books over others. Certain works are copied repeatedly. Others are ignored. The consequences accumulate across generations. Religious transformation provides another powerful force shaping literary survival. When societies adopt new belief systems, older texts sometimes lose their audiences. In some cases, they are actively opposed. In others, they simply cease to matter to those responsible for preservation. The distinction is important. A book can disappear through hostility. It can also disappear through indifference. Both outcomes produce silence. The transition from the classical world into late antiquity illustrates this complexity. As religious landscapes change across the Mediterranean and Near East, priorities shift. New communities preserve texts they consider valuable. Older works may continue circulating, decline gradually, or vanish altogether. The process varies enormously from region to region. No single explanation fully accounts for what survives and what does not. Some pagan authors are copied for centuries because educators continue finding them useful. Others disappear despite once being widely read. Certain religious writings flourish. Others fade into obscurity. Intellectual traditions compete not only for influence but for preservation. Every manuscript copied is a vote for survival. Every manuscript ignored moves closer to extinction. The fragility of this system becomes especially apparent when examining works later declared heretical or dangerous. Ancient religious controversies generate enormous quantities of writing. Competing groups defend their beliefs, criticize rivals, and produce extensive literature. When one tradition eventually gains dominance, the writings of opponents often become vulnerable. Sometimes they are destroyed, sometimes they're simply no longer reproduced. Either way, survival becomes uncertain. The discovery of texts near Nag Hammadi in Egypt during the 20th century dramatically illustrates this point. Many of these writings survive because they are hidden away rather than left exposed to changing religious and political circumstances. Without that concealment, they might have vanished entirely. Their survival reveals a broader truth. What appears lost forever may merely be hidden. Yet many suppressed works never reappear. Political power can be equally influential. Rulers throughout history understand the value of controlling historical narratives. Official histories celebrate victories. Unfavorable accounts may be discouraged. Criticism can become dangerous. Documents associated with defeated factions often face uncertain futures. Ancient civil wars are particularly destructive in this regard. Victors shape memory. Losers frequently lose their archives as well. The disappearance is not always intentional. Political collapse scatters records. Administrative systems fail. Support networks dissolve. Yet the effect is similar. One version of events survives more successfully than another. The historical record becomes uneven. This unevenness creates challenges for modern historians. When only one side of a controversy survives, interpretation becomes difficult. Scholars must remain aware that missing evidence may once have presented alternative perspectives. The silence itself becomes evidence. Sometimes what is absent matters almost as much as what remains. Book burnings occupy a special place in cultural memory because they make suppression visible. Flames create dramatic images. The destruction is immediate and unmistakable. Yet many of history's greatest literary losses occur without fire. A library loses funding. A school closes. A monastery stops copying certain works. A language falls out of use. A manuscript remains unread for generations. Eventually it deteriorates beyond recovery. The result is the same as burning, only slower. Knowledge disappears. One of the more surprising aspects of literary survival is how often ideological opponents preserve each other's writings. Critics quote the arguments they wish to refute. Scholars document views they consider mistaken. Historians record controversial positions for future reference. Without these opponents, some ideas would vanish completely. Ironically, hostility can sometimes aid preservation. A critic determined to attack a book may preserve passages more carefully than a supporter. This pattern appears repeatedly in ancient literature. Many fragments of disputed philosophies, religious movements, and intellectual traditions survive because adversaries considered them important enough to discuss. Conflict creates records. The relationship between power and preservation remains complicated. Not all censorship succeeds. Not all suppression is intentional. Not all losses result from ideology. Yet when historians examine vanished books collectively, they encounter unmistakable evidence that human choices matter. Natural decay destroys manuscripts. Accidents destroy collections. Political and religious decisions influence which texts receive protection. The forces overlap. Together they shape the literary landscape inherited by later generations. The consequences extend beyond literature. When books disappear, knowledge can disappear with them. Ancient science offers perhaps the most intriguing example. The ancient world produces remarkable achievements in mathematics, astronomy, engineering, medicine, and geography. Yet much of that intellectual output reaches the present only partially. How much has been lost remains uncertain. Scholars continue debating the question. What is clear is that vanished scientific works represent more than missing books. They represent missing observations, missing experiments, missing theories, and missing ways of understanding the natural world. And among all the categories of lost literature, few inspire more speculation than the scientific text that may have carried knowledge far beyond what survives today. When people imagine lost books, they often think of forgotten poems, vanished myths, or histories that no longer exist. Those losses are significant. They remove voices, stories, and perspectives from the human record. Yet another category of disappearance carries a different kind of fascination. What happens when scientific knowledge is lost? The question has inspired speculation for centuries. Popular imagination sometimes transforms vanished ancient books into repositories of miraculous secrets or technologies far beyond their time. Such claims usually exceed the available evidence. Historians remain cautious. The ancient world achieved remarkable things, but there's little support for fantasies involving lost superscience hidden in forgotten libraries. The reality is more interesting. Ancient scholars genuinely produced vast amounts of scientific, mathematical, medical, and technical writing. Much of it has disappeared. The loss is not mysterious because it contained impossible knowledge. The loss is significant because it contained real knowledge. Knowledge accumulated through observation, experimentation, calculation, and centuries of intellectual effort. The surviving record reveals only a portion of that achievement. Consider astronomy. Long before modern telescopes, ancient observers carefully tracked the movements of celestial bodies. In Mesopotamia, generations of scholars recorded planetary positions, eclipses, and recurring patterns in the sky. Their observations extended across centuries, creating data sets of remarkable value. Some of these records survive, many do not. The surviving material demonstrates extraordinary dedication and precision. It also hints at larger bodies of work that have vanished. Ancient astronomers produced commentaries, predictions, calculations, and theoretical discussions that are known only indirectly or have disappeared entirely. The same pattern appears in mathematics. The ancient world generates important developments in geometry, arithmetic, measurement, and applied mathematics. Some works survive through direct transmission. Others reach later generations through translations. Many are lost. One of the most famous examples involves the mathematician and engineer Archimedes, Several of his works survive, revealing extraordinary insight. Yet ancient references suggest that other writings once existed. Some disappeared completely, others survive only in fragmentary form. The story becomes even more remarkable when modern technology enters the picture. In the 20th century, scholars studying a medieval manuscript discover that the parchment contains traces of erased earlier writings. The manuscript is a palimpsest, a recycled document in which older text has been scraped away and overwritten. Beneath the later writing lies lost work by Archimedes. Advanced imaging techniques eventually reveal portions of text previously inaccessible. Suddenly, ideas hidden for centuries return to view. The episode serves as a reminder. Lost books are not always entirely lost. Sometimes they are merely concealed. Medicine presents another intriguing case. Ancient physicians record observations about disease anatomy, treatment, and surgery. The surviving writings of figures such as Galen and Hippocrates exert enormous influence on later generations. Yet these surviving works represent only part of a much larger medical tradition. Hospital schools and practitioners throughout the ancient world produce extensive literature. Much of it vanishes. The consequences are difficult to measure. A lost medical text may contain observations duplicated elsewhere. It may contain unique information. Often there is no way to know. The evidence remains incomplete. Historians therefore avoid sweeping claims about revolutionary discoveries hidden in vanished manuscripts. Still, what survives strongly suggests that the ancient scientific landscape was richer and more diverse than the surviving record alone would indicate. Engineering provides another example. Ancient civilizations construct roads, bridges, harbours, aqueducts, mines, and monumental buildings. Such achievements require practical knowledge. Manuals, technical descriptions, and instructional texts almost certainly circulate among specialists. A few survive. Most do not. The Roman world alone maintained infrastructure across enormous distances. Engineers designed systems for water management, transportation, construction, and military logistics. Written guidance undoubtedly plays a role, yet the literary evidence is fragmentary. Modern historians often reconstruct ancient engineering practices from surviving structures rather than surviving books. The buildings outlive the manuals that helped create them. Geography suffers similar losses. Ancient travelers, merchants, officials, and scholars compile information about distant regions. Maps are created, descriptions are written, measurements are recorded. Some works survive and provide invaluable information about how ancient peoples understood the wider world. Many others vanish. In some cases, later authors summarize them. In others, only titles remain. The result resembles looking at a partially completed map. Large sections are visible, others are blank. Philosophy and natural science overlap in fascinating ways as well. Ancient thinkers explore questions about matter, motion, causation, perception, and the structure of the universe. Some ideas later prove incorrect. Others anticipate concepts that would reappear centuries afterward. The importance lies not in predicting modern science, but in demonstrating the breadth of intellectual inquiry already underway. The lost works remind historians that surviving texts represent only a sample. A civilization capable of producing known masterpieces almost certainly produces many unknown ones. This realization has led some scholars to describe ancient intellectual history as a landscape seen through narrow windows. The view is impressive, but much remains hidden. The losses become even more striking when considering educational traditions. Schools require textbooks. Teachers produce commentaries. Students create notes. Libraries accumulate reference works. A functioning intellectual culture generates enormous quantities of writing. Most of it disappears. The survival rate is astonishingly low, yet the surviving fragments continue revealing surprises. A newly identified papyrus may preserve an unknown mathematical problem. A damaged manuscript may contain an overlooked scientific observation. A recovered fragment may shed light on how ancient scholars approach questions that still interest modern researchers. Each discovery expands the visible portion of the ancient world. At the same time, it emphasizes how much remains missing. No single explanation fully accounts for these losses. Physical decay, political upheaval, changing educational priorities, religious transformation, and simple chance all contribute. Together they erase immense bodies of knowledge while allowing scattered pieces to endure. This mixture of survival and disappearance fuels one of history's most persistent fascinations. People naturally wonder what else might have existed. What books remain hidden? What works vanished without leaving traces? What discoveries were recorded only once? The questions invite imagination, and imagination often gives rise to legends. Over centuries, stories begin circulating about mysterious books containing secret wisdom, forgotten histories, or extraordinary knowledge. Some legends have roots in real texts. Others emerge from misunderstanding, exaggeration, or wishful thinking. Between fact and myth lies a strange territory populated by books that may never have existed, books that certainly existed but disappeared, and books whose stories continue to blur the line between history and legend. The more books disappear, the easier it becomes for imagination to fill the empty spaces. A lost manuscript possesses a peculiar power. No one can open it. No one can read it. No one can prove exactly what it contained. The absence itself creates possibility. Over centuries, vanished texts accumulate stories around them. Some become symbols of hidden wisdom. Others acquire reputations far greater than anything their authors might have intended. The result is a shadow world of legendary books. Some of these books certainly existed. Some may have existed in forms different from the legends attached to them. Others remain so poorly documented that scholars still debate whether they ever existed at all. The fascination is understandable. When a book survives, its contents place limits on speculation. When a book disappears, almost anything can be imagined. Few examples illustrate this better than the reputation of the lost works associated with ancient wisdom traditions. Across Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, generations of scholars encounter references to texts said to contain profound knowledge. Sometimes these references are genuine, sometimes they are second-hand reports, sometimes they are little more than rumours repeated through centuries of retelling. The stories grow with each generation. A practical treatise becomes a mysterious manuscript. A philosophical work becomes a repository of secret knowledge. A lost archive becomes a symbol of everything humanity no longer knows. One recurring theme involves books attributed to famous individuals. Ancient cultures often associate remarkable texts with legendary figures. The attribution may be genuine, mistaken, symbolic, or entirely fictional. Determining the truth can be extraordinarily difficult. A well-known example emerges from traditions surrounding the Egyptian sage known to the Greeks as Hermes Trismegistus. Over time, various writings become associated with this figure. Some survive, others are reported but no longer exist. Later generations often describe these works as repositories of ancient wisdom, encompassing philosophy, cosmology, and spiritual knowledge. The historical reality is far more complex than the legends suggest. Yet the stories endure because they express a powerful idea. Somewhere in the past, people imagine there must have been books containing answers now forgotten. The same impulse appears in stories about lost royal archives. Ancient kings accumulate records. Great cities maintain libraries. Empires preserve documents spanning centuries. When these collections disappear, speculation follows naturally. What was inside? What knowledge vanished? Could important discoveries have been lost forever? Historians approach such questions carefully. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for every claim made about vanished collections. Most lost libraries likely contained mixtures of administrative records, literary works, religious texts, and scholarly writings rather than miraculous secrets. Even so, the uncertainty remains compelling. A destroyed archive creates a permanent gap in knowledge. The imagination notices that gap immediately. One particularly persistent category of legend involves lost histories. Ancient historians occasionally mention earlier works no longer available. Later writers encounter those references and begin wondering what information may have disappeared. Entire narratives become subjects of speculation. Did the missing history contain accounts of forgotten kingdoms? Did it describe events now unknown? Did it preserve traditions that would change modern understanding of the past? Sometimes the answers can never be known. The original manuscripts are gone, only the questions remain. Another source of fascination comes from undeciphered or partially understood texts. Not every surviving manuscript can be read easily. Languages evolve, scripts change, cultural context disappears. A text may physically survive while becoming intellectually inaccessible. This situation creates fertile ground for myths. The inability to understand a book is often mistaken for evidence that the book contains extraordinary secrets. More commonly, the obstacle is linguistic rather than mysterious. Yet the distinction is not always obvious to those encountering the text centuries later. Legends flourish in uncertainty. Perhaps the most famous example of a mysterious manuscript from a much later period is the Voynich manuscript. Although it does not belong to the ancient world, its reputation demonstrates how readily unexplained texts attract speculation. Countless theories emerge. Most fail under scrutiny. The pattern is familiar. Unknown content invites extraordinary explanations. Historical evidence usually points toward more ordinary possibilities. Ancient literature contains many similar cases, though often with far less surviving material. Fragments mention books that cannot be located. Catalogues list works that vanished long ago. References hint at collections that no longer exist. The temptation to imagine hidden knowledge is powerful. Yet historians generally find something more revealing. The real significance of lost books is not that they contain magical secrets. It is that they preserve ordinary human thought. The missing works likely include arguments, observations, stories, mistakes, experiments, debates, and reflections produced by people trying to understand their world. That reality is fascinating enough. The loss becomes more poignant when viewed this way. A vanished manuscript is not valuable because it promises impossible revelations. It is valuable because it represents a missing piece of humanity's collective memory. Still, certain legends continue because they are rooted in genuine mysteries. Ancient references occasionally describe works known from only a handful of sources. Scholars debate their nature, authorship, and influence. Some may have existed exactly as described. Others may have been misunderstood even in antiquity. The uncertainty keeps them alive. A title survives, a reputation survives. The book itself does not. Over time, these missing texts acquire symbolic meaning. They come to represent everything history failed to preserve, every vanished library, every uncopied manuscript, every archive destroyed by war, neglect, or disaster. The legendary books stand at the edge of the historical record, marking the boundary between what can still be known and what may remain inaccessible forever. Yet historians are not content simply to accept those boundaries. The search continues. Across deserts, caves, monasteries, archives, museums, and archaeological sites, researchers keep looking for surviving traces. New technologies open possibilities that previous generations could scarcely imagine. Damaged manuscripts become readable. Hidden text emerges from beneath erased writing. Buried collections reveal unexpected treasures. The ancient world has surprised scholars before. It may do so again, and the modern search for lost books has become one of the most ambitious intellectual investigations in history. The search for lost books never truly ends. Every generation inherits the same challenge faced by scholars centuries earlier. Somewhere beyond the surviving record lies an enormous landscape of missing knowledge. Most of it is gone forever. Some of it may still exist in forgotten collections, buried archives, damaged manuscripts, or overlooked fragments waiting for recognition. The difficulty lies in knowing where to look. For much of history, recovering lost literature depended largely on luck. A traveller discovered a manuscript in a monastery. A collector purchased a neglected document. A scholar recognized the importance of a text that others had ignored. Chance repeatedly altered the course of intellectual history. Modern researchers still benefit from luck, but they now possess tools that would have seemed miraculous to earlier generations. The search has become both archaeological and technological. Across museums, libraries, archives, and research institutions, specialists examine manuscripts with techniques capable of revealing details invisible to the naked eye. Ink that appears faded beyond recovery can sometimes be detected through advanced imaging. Writing hidden beneath damage may become legible again. Erased texts occasionally re-emerge after centuries of concealment. The transformation is remarkable. A manuscript once considered unreadable may suddenly yield new information. A fragment dismissed as insignificant may reveal part of a lost work. Entire fields of study have developed around these possibilities. Multispectral imaging is among the most influential tools. By photographing manuscripts under different wavelengths of light, researchers can distinguish between materials that appear identical under ordinary conditions. Faded ink often becomes more visible. Layers of writing can sometimes be separated. The technique has helped recover portions of text thought permanently inaccessible. What appears blank may not actually be blank. What appears lost may not be entirely lost. The implications extend far beyond individual manuscripts. Many collections contain documents that have never been thoroughly examined. Museums possess fragments acquired generations ago. Libraries maintain shelves of material catalogued under older systems. Archaeological excavations continue producing new discoveries. The search therefore operates on multiple fronts simultaneously. Some scholars work in deserts. Others work in laboratories. Others spend years studying catalogues and archives. All pursue traces of missing voices. One of the most fascinating aspects of the effort is the recovery of palimpsests. These manuscripts occupy a unique place in literary history. Because writing materials could be expensive, older texts were sometimes erased and reused. A scribe scraped away existing writing and produced a new manuscript on the same surface. The original text appeared gone. In reality, traces often remained. Centuries later, technology allows researchers to recover portions of those hidden writings. Beneath visible layers lie older works preserved unintentionally. The manuscript becomes a kind of historical time capsule containing multiple generations of intellectual activity. The recovery of writings associated with Archimedes demonstrates the extraordinary potential of this approach, but many other examples exist. Hidden beneath later texts are fragments of literature, theology, philosophy, and scholarship that might otherwise have disappeared completely. The process feels almost archaeological. Only the excavation occurs within a manuscript rather than beneath the ground. Meanwhile, traditional archaeology continues producing surprises. Excavations in Egypt regularly uncover papyri preserved by arid conditions. Ancient settlements yield letters, contracts, literary fragments, and administrative documents. Most discoveries are modest. A few prove transformative. A small fragment may confirm the existence of a lost text. A damaged scroll may preserve unknown lines from a famous author. An overlooked archive may illuminate aspects of daily life invisible elsewhere. The cumulative effect is profound. Each discovery expands the visible portion of the ancient world. At the same time, each discovery reveals how much remains hidden. The search increasingly relies on international collaboration. Historians, linguists, chemists, computer scientists, conservators, and archaeologists work together. The recovery of ancient knowledge has become a multidisciplinary enterprise. No single expert can solve every problem. A damaged manuscript may require chemical analysis, digital imaging, linguistic expertise, and historical interpretation before its significance becomes clear. The complexity reflects the scale of the challenge. The ancient world left behind an immense quantity of material. Most of it vanished. Enough remains to occupy generations of researchers. Artificial intelligence and advanced computational methods have recently entered the field as well. These tools help identify handwriting patterns, reconstruct damaged passages, compare textual traditions, and organize enormous databases of manuscripts. The technology is powerful, yet it does not eliminate uncertainty. Scholars still debate interpretations. Fragments remain incomplete. Context remains essential. Human judgment continues to play a central role. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for every mystery surrounding lost literature. Some manuscripts will never be recovered. Some discoveries will raise new questions rather than provide answers. This uncertainty is part of the appeal. The search remains open. One particularly exciting possibility involves collections not yet discovered. Archaeologists continue identifying new sites. Excavations reveal previously unknown buildings. Remote sensing technologies help locate buried structures. Every unexplored archive carries the potential for unexpected finds. The probability of uncovering another library comparable to Alexandria is extremely small. The possibility of finding smaller collections remains very real. History repeatedly demonstrates that significant discoveries often emerge from ordinary circumstances. A cave, a storeroom, a sealed jar, a forgotten shelf. The pattern is familiar because it keeps happening. Researchers therefore maintain a cautious optimism. Most lost books will remain lost. That reality is unavoidable, yet enough surprises continue appearing to justify the effort. Every recovered fragment narrows the silence slightly. Every deciphered text restores another voice. Every newly identified manuscript reminds humanity that the past is not a finished subject. It is an ongoing conversation. The remarkable thing is that even after centuries of destruction, neglect and disappearance, so much still survives. Fragments remain, quotations remain, manuscripts remain. Libraries continue preserving treasures copied across generations. The story of lost books is therefore not only a story of loss, it is also a story of survival. And as the search continues, the surviving traces force a final reflection. The greatest mystery may not be what vanished. It may be what those disappearances reveal about civilization itself, about memory, and about the fragile chain connecting one generation to the next. The history of lost books ultimately becomes a history of memory. Civilizations often imagine themselves as permanent. Their monuments appear solid. Their governments seem durable. Their traditions feel secure. People build libraries believing that future generations will inherit them. Scholars write for readers they will never meet. Rulers commission archives intended to preserve their achievements forever. Yet permanence is an illusion. The ancient world demonstrates this repeatedly. Empires vanish. Languages disappear. Religions transform. Trade routes shift. Cities decline. Libraries close. Manuscripts decay. The chain connecting one generation to another proves far more fragile than it appears. Lost books reveal this fragility with unusual clarity. A ruined temple remains visible even after centuries of neglect. A collapsed city leaves foundations beneath the soil. A broken statue can still be excavated and studied. Books are different. When they disappear, they often leave almost nothing behind. The absence itself becomes the evidence. This is why historians frequently describe the surviving literary record as incomplete. The phrase sounds modest, almost routine, yet its implications are profound. Modern understanding of the ancient world depends upon an archive shaped by survival rather than design. The people of antiquity did not choose which books would reach the 21st century. Chance participated in that decision. So did climate. So did politics. So did religion. So did economics. So did war. The surviving record is therefore both invaluable and selective. Imagine trying to understand a civilization while possessing only a small fraction of its conversations. Some speakers remain audible, others are silent. Certain subjects survive in detail, others appear only briefly. Whole regions of intellectual life may be underrepresented simply because the relevant text disappeared. The challenge affects nearly every area of ancient history. Historians studying politics face missing records. Philosophers confront vanished schools of thought. Literary scholars encounter incomplete traditions. Scientists investigating ancient knowledge work with fragmented evidence. The losses shape what can be known. At times they shape what can even be imagined. This realization encourages humility. Modern observers often assume that surviving evidence provides a reasonably complete picture of the past. Lost books suggest otherwise. The visible record resembles an island rising above water. Beneath the surface lies a much larger landscape now inaccessible. The metaphor is not perfect. Some of that submerged landscape can still be glimpsed through fragments and references. Much of it cannot. The uncertainty remains permanent. Yet there is another lesson hidden within the losses. The disappearance of books demonstrates that knowledge does not survive automatically. Every surviving text represents an unbroken chain of care. Someone copies it. Someone stores it. Someone protects it. Someone decides it remains worth preserving. Generation after generation, individuals perform these tasks often without knowing whether future readers will ever appreciate their efforts. The chain can stretch across centuries. A manuscript copied in antiquity survives because medieval scribes preserve it. Later scholars study it. Libraries maintain it. Conservators protect it. Researchers translate it. Readers continue engaging with it. The survival of knowledge depends upon countless acts of stewardship. Most occur quietly. Few receive recognition. Yet without them, much of human history would vanish. This perspective changes the meaning of libraries. A library is not merely a collection of books. It is a defense against forgetting. The same applies to archives, museums, and scholarly institutions. Their importance extends beyond preservation of objects. They preserve continuity. They connect generations separated by enormous spans of time. Lost books reveal what happens when that continuity breaks. The silence left behind can last forever. At the same time, the surviving record demonstrates remarkable resilience. Despite wars, fires, floods, political upheavals, and centuries of decay, thousands of ancient texts endure. Their survival is improbable. Many have travelled extraordinary journeys. A scroll copied in Hellenistic Egypt survives because later readers value it. A Roman manuscript passes through medieval monasteries. An ancient philosophical work reaches the modern world through multiple translations across different cultures and languages. The roots are often complex. Knowledge migrates. It adapts. It survives in unexpected ways. Sometimes an idea outlives the book that first expressed it. A theory passes into later writings. A story enters oral tradition. A scientific observation influences future scholars. The original manuscript disappears, but traces remain embedded elsewhere. Loss is rarely absolute. Survival is rarely complete. The two exist together. This mixture helps explain why lost books continue to fascinate people. They occupy a boundary between presence and absence. Enough evidence survives to suggest what once existed. Not enough survives to fully restore it. The imagination naturally moves toward those gaps. What survives encourages curiosity. What is missing sustains it. Scholars still debate many aspects of ancient literary loss. No single explanation fully accounts for the disappearance of so many works. Different regions experience different histories. Different traditions face different challenges. Yet the overall pattern remains unmistakable. humanity inherited only a fraction of its ancient intellectual heritage. The fraction is extraordinary. The missing portion may have been even larger. That realization can seem discouraging at first. Entire libraries vanished. Countless authors disappeared. Unrecorded discoveries may have been forgotten forever. Yet another interpretation is possible. The remarkable fact is not that so much was lost. The remarkable fact is that anything survived at all. Against overwhelming odds, voices from thousands of years ago still speak. Their words cross empires, religions, languages, and centuries. They survive political revolutions, environmental disasters, and cultural transformations. The chain bends. It rarely breaks completely. And that enduring connection leads toward a final reflection on what the lost books of the ancient world still mean today, not only as missing artifacts, but as reminders of the fragile relationship between memory, time, and civilization itself. The lost books of the ancient world are often described as a tragedy. In many ways they are. Entire libraries disappeared. Authors once admired across continents vanished from memory. Histories were reduced to fragments. Scientific observations were scattered. Poems survived only in isolated lines. Philosophical debates that once occupied generations became little more than names in catalogues. The scale of the loss is difficult to comprehend. Yet after following the story across ruined cities, burned archives, forgotten scrolls, buried manuscripts, and centuries of uncertainty, another perspective begins to emerge. The lost books are not merely a story about what vanished. They are a story about what civilization chooses to remember. Every society creates far more knowledge than it can preserve indefinitely. The process is unavoidable. Documents accumulate, ideas multiply, new works replace older ones. Information expands faster than any archive can comfortably contain. The ancient world experienced this reality long before the modern age. Even the greatest libraries faced limits. Space was finite. Resources were finite. Human attention was finite. Choices had to be made. Those choices shaped the future. A scribe deciding which manuscript deserved copying participated in a process larger than he could imagine. A librarian organizing shelves contributed to the survival of certain voices. A scholar preserving a quotation inadvertently rescued a fragment of a vanished work. Small actions accumulated across centuries. The consequences reached millennia. What survives today often does so because countless individuals separated by time and geography independently concluded that a text remained valuable. Sometimes they were correct. Sometimes their judgments reflected the priorities of their own age. Either way, their decisions became part of history. The surviving literary record therefore tells two stories simultaneously. It tells the story contained within the books themselves. It also tells the story of why those books survived. The second story is often invisible, yet it is equally important. Consider the works still read today. They endured not only because they were written, but because they were copied repeatedly through generations of uncertainty. Political systems changed. Languages evolved. Empires rose and fell. Religious traditions transformed entire societies. Still the books travelled forward. The journey is extraordinary. A text composed in classical Athens might survive through Roman copyists, Byzantine scholars, Islamic translators, medieval scribes, Renaissance collectors, and modern publishers. At any point the chain could have broken. Instead it continued. Meanwhile, thousands of other works disappeared. The contrast is sobering. It reminds historians that the ancient world reaching the present is not identical to the ancient world that once existed. The surviving books form a selection rather than a complete archive. Some voices are loud because they survived. Others are silent because they did not. Understanding this distinction changes the way history is read. Silence becomes meaningful. Absence becomes evidence. The gaps themselves become part of the story. Modern scholarship increasingly recognizes this reality. Historians no longer focus solely on surviving texts. They also study lost texts, missing traditions, vanished archives, and patterns of preservation. The goal is not merely to recover information, but to understand the processes that shape cultural memory. Why did certain works survive? Why did others disappear? What does that reveal about ancient societies? What does it reveal about later societies? The questions extend beyond antiquity. They reach into the present. Digital technology often creates the impression that modern knowledge is secure. Information can be copied instantly. Vast quantities of data can be stored across multiple locations. Preservation appears easier than ever before. Yet historians of lost books recognize a familiar warning. Knowledge remains fragile. Formats change. Technologies become obsolete. Institutions fail. Records disappear. The specific risks differ from those faced by ancient scribes, but the underlying challenge remains recognizable. Every generation must decide what deserves preservation. The lesson of the ancient world has not lost its relevance. Perhaps that is one reason the story continues to resonate so strongly. Lost books remind people that memory is not automatic. Civilization depends upon active remembrance. Without it, even extraordinary achievements can fade. At the same time, the story offers a measure of hope. Despite immense losses, the chain of preservation succeeded more often than complete pessimism would suggest. Ancient voices still reach modern readers. Ideas survive across thousands of years. Fragments recovered from deserts, caves, libraries, and ruins continue expanding human understanding. The conversation is not over. Every newly discovered manuscript adds another piece. Every recovered fragment restores another voice. Every technological advance creates new opportunities to hear echoes once thought silent forever. The ancient world remains incomplete. It is not inaccessible. Somewhere beneath desert sands, inside forgotten storerooms, within unopened archives, or hidden beneath layers of erased writing, additional traces may still survive. Most lost books will never return. A few might. No one knows which ones. That uncertainty is part of the enduring mystery. The shelves of Alexandria are gone. The archives of vanished cities have largely disappeared. Countless scrolls have turned to dust. Yet their absence continues shaping the modern world. Historians search for them. Scholars reconstruct them. Readers imagine them. Entire fields of study grow from the effort to understand what has been lost. In a strange way, the missing books remain present. Not as objects, not as complete texts, but as questions. Questions about memory. Questions about survival. Questions about the fragile thread connecting one generation to another. And in those questions, the lost books of the ancient world continue their journey through time. The lamp burns low. The shelves fade into darkness. Outside, cities rise and fall, kingdoms appear and disappear, and centuries pass with quiet inevitability. Yet somewhere a reader still unrolls a scroll, opens a manuscript, or studies a fragment rescued from the edge of oblivion. The story of lost books is often told as a story of destruction, but in its final form it is equally a story of endurance. Across thousands of years, humanity has fought a continuous battle against forgetting. Sometimes it wins, sometimes it loses. More often it achieves something in between. A portion survives, a portion disappears. The record reaches the future damaged but still alive. That imperfect survival is what makes the ancient world feel so close and so distant at the same time. The surviving texts allow voices from long ago to speak again. They reveal hopes, fears, arguments, observations, and moments of curiosity that remain recognizable across immense stretches of time. The people who created those books could not imagine the modern world. Yet many wrote with the hope that someone somewhere would continue reading. Some of those hopes were fulfilled, others were not. Many voices fell silent forever, yet even silence leaves a shape behind. The missing shelves of forgotten libraries, the vanished scrolls known only through references, the authors remembered by name but not by words. Together they form a shadow archive running alongside the surviving one. The shadow archive can never be fully recovered. Perhaps that is why it remains so compelling. It reminds humanity that history is not a complete collection. It is a collection of survivors. Beyond the edges of that collection lies everything that time, chance, neglect, conflict, and circumstance carried away. Not hidden secrets or magical wisdom, but ordinary human thought, millions of moments of observation, creativity, memory, and reflection that once existed and now mostly do not. And still enough remains. Enough remains to reconstruct civilizations. Enough remains to understand forgotten worlds. Enough remains to hear distant voices speaking across centuries. As the light fades over the ancient libraries of memory, one image lingers. A single manuscript rests on a shelf. It survives because someone cared enough to preserve it. Then someone else. Then another. The chain continues across generations, stretching through darkness and uncertainty. A fragile chain, a remarkable chain, the chain that carries memory through time.